If you've clicked on this video and you're expecting me to shit all over the game and say that it's just a bad game, you're in for a rude awakening. But also, I'm not going to make excuses. Here's the absolute truth about Need for Speed Unbound. Let's go! There's not one glaring thing that caused this game to fall in popularity. It's really a combination of a bunch of different things. And when you add them up, it really shines a light on some key mistakes that Criterion and EA made. The game itself isn't terrible, although I can't say it's a great game either. Let's get into it. The very first issue is actually just a bad decision. The game was designed for current gen consoles only, which means no PS4 and no Xbox One. It may seem obvious on the surface why this was a mistake, but there are things that you're not thinking about. To fully understand why this was a miscalculation, you have to understand the state of the world at the time they made this decision. We were basically just getting over the COVID crisis, and for those of you that really didn't pay attention, the world had huge problems with manufacturing and shipping. Despite that, both Microsoft and PlayStation launched their consoles in November of 2020 and had problems getting enough consoles to market. The availability issues for both carried on through 2021 and into 2022. You see, on a normal new console cycle, there would be plenty of consoles for people to buy at Christmas of the launch year, and the majority of gamers would have upgraded. But because of COVID, there was huge inventory deficits and many people were out of work or making very little money at the time, and so about half of the people who probably would have upgraded actually did. Combine that with the decision to only offer the game on new consoles, and you instantly have only half of the normal potential player base for the game. So there goes 50% before the game was even finished. Fast forward to mistake number 2. They took a chance with the art style and they let leaks set a very strange narrative. First, let's talk about the leaks. More than a year ago, in April of 2022, it was leaked that the art style would have some anime elements. The leaker specifically used the word anime, and I think it immediately turned off a portion of the potential buyers for the game. Now that the game has been out for a while, we all know it doesn't really give off anime vibes, even though the effects use a technique called cell shading on both the characters and some of the driving effects, which does happen to be a popular art technique for anime. So the leaker wasn't exactly wrong, but that being said, it's a very risky move to go in that direction, and it's something we've never seen before in a Need for Speed game. According to my comment section and just my general conversations with people, it really deterred people from buying the game. I think Criterion and EA made two mistakes after this leak happened. Number one, they didn't address it at all. There was no official statements, no corrections, no defense of the art style choices. They just let the community go wild making assumptions. Basically, by not saying anything, we were sort of forced to guess the answers to all of the questions we had surrounding the art style. And number two, when the official release of information was coming through, much of the marketing and info releases showed a ridiculous amount of visual effects. It made it seem like it was going to be on your screen constantly, and so that 50% I talked about earlier was actually cut in half again by this polarizing art style. The potential player base was sitting at 25% before the game even launched. Now, I actually love the art style and visual effects. I think they enhance the gameplay quite a bit. And you may have another opinion, and that proves my point exactly. It seems like people either loved it or hated it. Mistake number 3. They artificially lengthened the game. Every aspect of the game at launch was designed to create a longer experience. The campaign forced you to progress through the day and night cycles, which took way too long, and it was very repetitive. They split the solo experience from the multiplayer and forced you to unlock and buy all of the cars separately for each. Again, that took forever. Money was hard to come by and upgrades were expensive in both multiplayer and solo experiences. And finally, the challenges to unlock cars in multiplayer specifically take an insane amount of time. To unlock one car, some of the challenges were to complete 30 playlists, and a playlist is 3 races. That's 90 races to unlock one car. Anyways, the point is, this type of grind made players quit very early, and in the PC world turned to cheating the system and adding money to their accounts using mods and hacks. So of the 25% player base the game launched with, more than half of those players quit the game in the first couple of weeks. Mistake number 4. They took way too long to put out the first content update and had almost no communication or releases leading up to it. They also did nothing to introduce a roadmap, which usually helps retain players. If we know what's coming up in the future, we might be excited about it and thus more incentivized to keep playing the game. Now the update was good, and I believe it did increase the player base temporarily, but because there was no replayable type features added, people got bored within the first 2 weeks after the update and once again abandoned the game. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is not really a mistake, but a design choice that I personally like, but the majority of the hardcore Need for Speed competitive players just don't care for, and that's the burst NOS driving mechanic. Basically, the gripe is that the gameplay is just too dependent on farming burst NOS. In order to be fast, you have to farm, and in order to farm, you have to do all kinds of wacky, non-race movements and take strange lines to maximize your burst NOS gains. In addition to that, to be fast, the racing lines don't matter. And I can see how that might be aggravating to players who spent countless hours practicing how to choose the perfect racing line. It's not something that many players can relate to, but to be honest, the hardcore competitive players are the ones who will play the game for years after the publisher stops supporting it just to chase personal bests. So if the game's driving mechanics are off-putting to that group of players, you just won't see a ton of people playing long term. If Criterion or EA is seeing this, there is a silver lining for the game. Remember earlier when I talked about the console shortages? Well, over the next few years, more and more players will be upgrading their consoles, as it seems the shortages have been resolved and gaming PCs will continue to get cheaper, so the potential player base can rise slightly, which means you have an opportunity to bring this game back to life with the next updates. Volume 3 and Volume 4, hopefully, should add things that make the game replayable, allow players to turn off completely the visual effects, and maybe change the drift handling so that the burst NOS isn't quite as important for drift builds. The last one actually kind of seems too hard, but I thought I'd throw it in there as a Hail Mary for these competitive players. Oh, and for God's sakes, increase the party size to at least 8 players. 4 is ridiculous. If you can do that, or something like that, or just maybe add some things that we haven't seen in a Need for Speed game before and make it interesting and replayable, I think players would come back to the game. It sits on a very nice foundation, it's a good game, it just needs a little bit of help, and I've been saying this since launch. Unfortunately, a lot of things leading up to the game's launch and a few things after the game launched have really put this game in a bad place. And my fear is that EA, who's really hungry for money, is just not gonna see the potential of the game, and we're maybe not gonna get very many updates past Volume 3. I really hope they don't abandon it before a Volume 4 update, which would be 2 more updates from the time I'm posting this video, but there's always a chance that they do what they did to Need for Speed Heat and just call it quits and start working on the next game, because that next game will sell for $60 or $70 and players will buy it. It's a Need for Speed game, and that alone will sell copies. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. Shout out to all the Heat 5 members of the channel. I will catch you on the next one. Trigger out.